Welcome back. We're going to make a polygon box right now. And the cool thing about this is you can see the multiple shapes and whatnot, but it's all based off of equilateral triangles, and depending on how many you put together, it does need to be in multiples of 2. Usually the 6 is the smallest, because when you bring this end to end, you'll see that it creates a triangular shape. Whereas we have 8, bringing those end to end, and that will create a square shape. We can also create a pentagon and a hexagon, all depending on how many number of units that you have to put together. So let's get started. I did have some of the materials already prepped, but basically what you want to do is determine what your wall height is going to be. And just to make my life a little bit simpler, I measured this out at 3 inches, and you can use that museum board that was supplied in your kit. And then from here, once you have the height determined, you can actually just rely on your triangle. Now I'm going to use my utility knife. I have that, but your craft knife will work just as well. And the neat thing about this is that once you have your height measured, that means that you don't have to measure anything else. So I can just line up my triangle here on the edge, and I'm going to cut this excess off. And then what I can do is I can give myself a little more surface area, but I'm just lining this up from that point of where I cut right here. Make sure it's really nice and flush on that edge. And I have one triangle. So for today's demo, I'm actually going to be doing the triangle version, so you can see how that might differ from the square and the pentagon that I have put together. And here I can actually line this up again, and I'm just going to cut the remaining pieces. So all those triangles should be the same size, and that's important. It's easy for this to slip, so you just want to take your time with it. I do have some additional ones already pre-cut, and in terms of the base, that will be determined on what shape we ultimately decide on. So I'm going to put these other items to the side, but the best way to go about this is to select your covering paper that you want to utilize. I'm just going to use this, and so what we end up doing is we line the interior prior to covering the outside, and that's what those other pieces that I had shown to you already, where these were completed. So this actually functions as the interior, and so I want to make sure that that material is face down. And then what I can do is take my individual cardboard pieces, and I'm going to glue these down individually. Using your mixture is going to be a good way to go for this. And normally what I like to do is to make sure that I am running this off onto one edge. It just makes my life a little bit simpler. We are going to need a little extra space at one end for a tab. Making sure that that's nice and flush with that edge of that covering material. And remember, you can flip this over and use your bone folder or Teflon. Grab my next triangle and keep going down the line. You notice that I did alternate that, so you're going to do that every single time that you add a new panel. And I'm butting it right up to the edge of the previous one. All right, once this is done, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are giving ourselves at least a cheater strip's worth, so 5/8 of an inch all the way on one edge, because that's actually going to get tabbed onto the base itself. And so I'm just going to go ahead and line this up. See that there? And then just on one side, it's going to have a tab. The other side can be cut flush. And from here, what we would need to do is we're going to cut a little bit of a tab here. And for these different sections where it's going to flex, we want to make sure that we cut those out. And what I normally like to do is to mimic the angle that already exists there. And I can just go down the line. And I'll do the opposite for the other side. You can see how this is actually going to bend around. And then we will use that tab to adhere. Now you notice it will show on the inside. So what you can do if you're worried about that tab extending too much, I'm going to trim down this angle just a little bit more to match the angle on the other side. And then from there I'm ready to join to the base. Now I mentioned I was going to go with the triangle. I am going to go ahead and use this. I actually had some leftover triangles that I'm just going to use as the base. That makes my life a lot easier. So the best way to go about this is that we're going to glue this one tab that will be joined to the other outside wall. And so that's going to create a triangular shape. You will mostly have to use your fingers for this because it might be a little hard to get your bone folder or Teflon folder on the inside. And then from there, I've got these different tabs, and you're going to have to glue one on at a time. But essentially, this is going to get glued on top of there to create the base for this piece. And with the triangular one, it is a lot tighter than what I'm accustomed to. But essentially, I'm going to have to just take it one by one. And I may end up having to introduce some adhesive from the inside because it is so much tighter. And I think to make my life a little easier, I'm just going to go ahead and just introduce a little glue there since it is so tight to ensure that that little overlap is going to stick. And then I'm going to apply my adhesive over top of that tab. And I can simply close this. And then from the inside then, what you'll need to do is get your bone folder or your Teflon folder to ensure that that is all sticking down really nice and tightly. And that creates that shape. I'm going to show you with the rectangular one as well, because I think you'll find that most of you are going to be probably attracted to that side because the right angles are actually much easier to work with. So it's the same process. Then from there, what we're going to be doing is utilizing some covering material for the outside edge. And you can see that this is pretty floppy at the moment. It will solidify once we get that covering material on the outside. Now, in terms of the covering material, we're going to need a little bit to go onto the inside and the outside of this piece. And so you'll want a piece that's going to be wide enough. And I would give yourself probably measure the height that we have here, and I would add about 5/8 at the head and also at the bottom, because you're going to have a little bit that's going to wrap around this inside lip, and then you'll also have some that will go on to the bottom side. And so I'm going to jump back to my triangular one, just to work with. And so I have this tie-on Rui paper that's actually two-sided. You can see the two different sides. And for my purposes, I'm going to measure this out. So that's 3 inches. So I'm definitely want at least 4.5 inches to work with. In fact, I'm going to give myself 5. Why not? And for this piece, what's going to happen is that you are going to glue this face side and we'll smooth that out. In fact, I'm going to center that a little bit more, but I do want to try to make sure that this is even as I glue it along that edge. Then I'll glue the next surface. Now that I have most of those covered, what I do want to do is release any excess along here prior to gluing this other piece down. And so what I can do is I can just lay this on its side and line up my cheater strip and then trim that down. And normally what I like to do is to make sure that this is glued down prior to gluing down this other page, because it does, or side, because it does help it to hide a little bit. And I think for my purposes, I'm going to go ahead and trim this corner down so it doesn't overextend, and then I can trim down those other edges later. I'm going to leave that overhang there just for a moment, but what I can do is I can slit these corners out, and I like to lay it where the point is sort of sitting on the edge of the table. And I'm just going to cut those straight out. And you'll see that these actually will get glued, and we're going to turn those onto the inside lip. And we'll do the same thing for the bottom. I'm just going to trim this little bit off. Just don't want that excess bulk. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these out. And I do need to trim the corners here because you'll see that if I were to turn this over, it does overlap quite a bit. So let's see how that's going to go. That looks like it's lining up a little bit more. I can give myself a little more of an angle. That seems to fit a little bit better. Normally I like to make sure that this whole piece has dried before trimming an edge like this, but I'm going to go ahead and cut that now because it's just going to make it a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to do those inside tabs first. Remember, those were a straight cut. I'll do the same for the bottom. So essentially that's how you get the outside and the inside covered. The only other thing that we need to do is to cut a triangular shape for an end sheet, and I would say measuring off of one of the triangles that you have, the easiest way to go about that, since I have some of this covering material, is that I can just lay this on top as a template and use my craft knife to trim the excess off. That's a little big, so what I can do just to make it a little bit smaller is to just off of one side, I can eyeball this. I'm doing about 1/4 of an inch, can glue out this piece and then very carefully lay it on the inside and smooth it out. So that finishes off that form. You can see the end sheet on the inside there. And then in terms of a cover, I do have some extra triangles, so I could utilize this. I might cut one that's just a little bit larger. It's always nice to have an overhang. The other thing we can do is cover one of these individually and just add some more bulk for the bottom of the base. I'm going to go ahead and cover those pieces from my scrap materials, and I'll be right back. All right, I just wanted to go over creating the outer lid, inner lid, and a secondary base. And basically, we glue our board down to the covering material, and then what we can do is use our cheater's strip, my apologies. And then one thing that we have to keep in mind is that you can't just turn this over because it's going to get so bulky on the top. So this is where we're going to utilize our 30, 60, 90 degree triangle, and we're going to use our 30-degree angle and go around the edges. I'm going to remember to come at least a board thickness away from that corner. I'm overextending my triangle to compensate. You'll see when I remove the material. So you can see that there's a little bit of excess space, and then we just go ahead and turn this over the way that we've done before. Now you may need to cut a slightly larger piece for the outer lid. It all depends on how your construction goes, how tight it is. This paper wants to stick really well, and it's also quite malleable. It's a fun one to use. And pinch towards the adjacent side. So normally I'd like to let these dry under weights for at least an hour, if not overnight. That way it's nice and flat. The one thing that I decided I wanted to do is to create a little bit of a pull tab, as you saw on this square one. This one actually has a key attached to it as well, just something fun. And the best way to go about this is that you can look at your triangle for the outside shape, and then I'm basically going to line up my triangle with that, and then I can hold my ribbon so I can see where that's going to be, and this makes sure that it forms a nice line, and you can actually use your awl on either side of that to poke a hole, and that gives you a better idea. That way you don't have to use a pencil. The other thing that you can do too, if you have access to a chisel, is to figure out where that center mark is, and I had determine that. Let's see. And you can either do this on the self-healing mat, or if you happen to have a punching board or something you could punch into. Definitely want to go through that space. You can use your micro spatula, or if you have a non-serrated butter knife, to go through that edge. And then from there, what you need to do is to grab your, sorry, I dropped mine on the ground, grab your ribbon, and I like to loop this over, and I'm going to very carefully feed this through. Now, if depending on the ribbon that you choose, it may be a little bit more challenging to get through there, but you could also use your micro spatula or some sort of non-serrated butter knife, and you can pull this through to create a little loop for yourself. And this material is not very heavy, so you don't have to create an inset, but what you could do is carve around there and peel away some of those layers to make up for some of the bulk. And for my purposes, I just want to add a little bit of adhesive on both of sides of that ribbon, and we'll adhere that down so that's splayed out. And then what you can do, if you happen to have a hammer handy, you can either pound this out. You can also use the blunt end of your bone folder to sort of tamp that down. And that creates the little loop for the outer lid. Now that I have these other components ready, I know that I want this to be my inner lid. And so what I'm going to do is, since it's a smaller piece, I'll go ahead and glue this and center that. I'm going to center that. Definitely press on it and make sure it's sticking. And you'll want to wait this out for at least an hour, if not overnight. That ensures that it's going to dry nice and flat. And then I also, as you recall, I had a secondary base. I'm going to go ahead and glue that. This is an optional item, but it does give some nice stability. And I just match that up with the shape. You can see from the side, it'll help to double that up. I would place some weights inside here, weight that out, and when you're done, you've got yourself a neat little Polygon box. Enjoy!